Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Tines 101. My name is Kevin Davis. I'm a sales engineer here at Tines, and I'll be walking you through today's presentation. So to kick it off, we'll dive right into the slide presentation, and then we'll go into Tines, and we'll start to build our first story. So back in 2018, Owen Hinchy founded Tines, and then also brought along Thomas Kinsella as another co-founder of his. Both of them worked together previously at organizations like DocuSign, eBay, PayPal. The main driver for founding Tines was really the inability for them to find a solution in the market that really helped them focus on and automate the workflows and tasks that their teams were working with and handling on a daily basis. So with that, we have two offices. One is our headquarters in Dublin, Ireland. We also have a Boston office as well. We recently received our Series B funding, and it's a list of our investors here. But if we dive into how and why Tines is different, it's really going to be the three pillars that we see here. And one is our focus, and that's really being laser focused on workflow automation, which means there's no chat, threat intel, or ticket management system built into the Tines platform. We'll dive into that more as we go through and build out our story. The other is usability. So really making the UI and the platform very, very simple, not only for developers and engineers, but any frontline teams, analysts, users that don't have a coding or engineering background, really making it simple for them to dive right in and start to build out a story like the one we're going to run through today. And then the last is flexibility. And that's our ability to utilize any of the 7 actions that we have to build out any workflow story and automate any manual process that an organization or team has in place today that they want to offload from analysts and humans to an automation platform like Tines. So there are these Tines laws, and really the laws are there's 7 primitive actions, and any combination of these actions will allow you to automate not only any workflow, but any process that you have in place today. And with those actions, we have our webhook, IMAP, email, HTTP request, trigger action, event transform, and then a send to story. And the automation is only as effective when it's implemented by teams on the front line. And really to be useful, an automation platform does need to at least be learnable within 3 hours or less. And I think when we dive into building out our story, we'll get that across where we can actually start to build a functioning story within about 15 to 20 minutes and start to have certain workflows already be automated by the time we end this webinar today. So to dive into the action event architecture within Tines, it'll make a lot more sense when we start to build that story out. But really, again, those 7 building blocks are the actions, and those are the building blocks to automation stories, and they perform certain tasks based on the configuration that the user provides. Those actions then emit events, and those events are structured data sent between actions. They're stored as JSON objects, which provides extreme flexibility as we're going through and automating any of these workflows. And then the stories are a collection of actions working together. So this action event architecture ultimately translate into the stories that we're going to build to automate, again, those manual processes, workflows that we have in place today. So there's no need to write or maintain code. It's really just utilizing those 7 building blocks to build on that workflow automation that needs to be built out so we can start making use of everyone's time more wisely and put in place a repeatable process that's not only scalable, but works regardless of knowledge transfer that may or may not be going on. And just a reference to some of our customers here, as you can see, we're working with a number of different organizations in many different verticals, and really just helping them automate all of the workflows and manual processes that they had in place, and now taking advantage of Tines, they're able to be far more effective on the front lines by utilizing the Tines platform itself. So with that, we'll dive into a demo of the product, and we'll start to build out our first story. So if I go over to the Tines platform here, when I first log in, I'll be brought directly into this dashboard section. This is really a high-level overview of the actions that have been used, as well as the total events that have been submitted today. We also have our most active stories, as well as the most active actions within all of our stories across the platform. From here, I have my teams, so I can drill into my Boston sales engineering team. In here, I have a full list of all of the stories that I have built out. I also have my credentials vault, where I can store API keys, passwords, and any useful information to be called and used globally when I'm building out my stories. To do that, just simply click New Credential, add the name, select the type, and then from there you have the ability to define the access controls, making that only available to your team or globally to everybody within the Times platform. And then the same is true for resources. Most commonly, these are usernames, URLs that need to be called while we're executing HTTP requests to things like Jira, ServiceNow, Slack. And in here, we can again go ahead and add that name, define the access control, and then input the value down in this builder text box. So now that we've gone ahead and we've taken a look at our team, as well as what the credentials are and the resources which are going to be used as we build out our story, let's actually dive into and start creating a story ourselves. So if I go into my stories section, we'll click Create New Story. And from here, I'll be presented with the Times storyboard. So this is where all of the creation and setup is going to be utilized for the 7 actions that we have in this top left-hand corner. Again, the webhook, IMAP, email, HTTP request action, trigger, event transform, and then the send to story action are our 7 building blocks. And again, any combination of these 7 actions will allow us to automate any workflow that we have in place today that we want to automate for any manual processes that are going on. The 3 main actions to get data into Times is the webhook, the IMAP, and the HTTP request action. But before we go ahead and start working with those, I'm going to go ahead and properly name this story here. And then the first thing I'll do is I'll drag and drop over my webhook action. And once I've done that, you can see the right-hand side has changed. I now have the ability to reconfigure the name. I have the builder. I have whether or not this action is currently working or not working, and then some additional information down here, which we'll dive into shortly. I also have the link to the webhook action. So if I click on that, I'll immediately be brought to a new tab. And then if I go back into Times, we can see we already have this event bubble in the top right corner of the action showing us as of an event of 1. So if I dive into the event section here, I can click on show. And then we'll start to present you with the information that was submitted to the webhook or the action itself. And then in this particular case, we're going to show you some headers and then the response and what the body was in that response. But before we dive into building out this story, I do want to point out we do also have annotations. So if you want to document each step in the story or certain branches within the story itself, you have the ability to define that and make sure it's, again, usable, repeatable, and any new analyst or user coming into the Times platform immediately understands exactly what's going on. So here we'll just add a header. Call this our first story. And then we can go ahead and add a list of build story and then check story. So now we have that in here. We now have our annotation built out with a couple of checkboxes. Now over here, further down on the left-hand side, we have what are called public templates. We have about 1,500 plus of these public templates available to us. So any of the tools that you might be currently using today, some of the ones we'll be using in this demo are VirusTotal. So we have the ability to utilize some of these pre-configured actions already. So if we wanted to drag and drop over this search for URL in VirusTotal, you can see here we already have majority of the information already configured. Again, it's just a matter of defining the appropriate credential resource, which is our VirusTotal API key. And then this resource section here is going to be a path, JSON path that we're going to call, so that way we can properly search virus total for the information that we're going to add in to this webhook. So if we go back over to the webhook action, as you remember, I clicked on summary and that triggered this first event. That's one way to start to get data into the Times platform. Another feature within the webhook action itself specifically is the ability to utilize and create forms. So here, if I want to go ahead and name this form my Times 101 form, that will update for us. I can go ahead and add a description, but most importantly, I need to define a receiving action, which is going to be that webhook. Once I select that, now see this blue submit box highlight for us, and we can go ahead and start to add fields to this form. There are many different field options. As you can see here, we have the ability to upload files, multi-select options, dates, URLs, email, long text, and short text. And then on top of that, we have the ability to make things either required, set max character limits, as well as provide a description. So here, I'll just go ahead and add my name. I'll add in my email address, select that as an email, do something like my company. And then today we're going to focus on submitting a URL. So we'll go ahead and add that URL in there, and we will make this field required. So now that I have the fields that I would like within my form, we can go ahead and quickly test this out. Submit our information. And our link will be the Times website. Now I can go ahead and click submit. And we should now have a second event bubble populate here, which we do, which is great. So when we select that webhook action, again, if we go to the events section, we can immediately click show. And now we'll have that new information provided to us in this webhook action body. This is going to be extremely useful as we're going through and continuing to add actions to our story to call that information, again, to automate whatever workflow or process that we have in place today. So this particular story, we're going to actually go ahead and we're going to analyze the URLs that are submitted in that form. And then from there, we'll go ahead and create a nice JIRA ticket. So that way any analyst or frontline user that's going to be responding to and taking action on those tickets can have all of the useful information they need to properly understand whether or not the URL is malicious and any potential actions that they should take after that. So going back into the properties here, the next thing I'm going to want to do is utilize one of my additional actions. And in this particular case, we'll use the event transform. So if I drag and drop this over here, we can see that we have, again, some information already provided to us, the mode that it's going to be in, which is message only for this one that I'm using. And then here we have this message field and then some text value in here. And we have the opportunity to see exactly what configuration options are available directly in the UI itself. And we also have documentation to immediately understand what functionality and features are available for this particular action. So we're going to be utilizing the extract functionality for this event action. And instead of using that, I'm going to go ahead and add in a search for my public template. And I want to go ahead and take a look at extracting a domain. So we'll go ahead into the internal, drag and drop that over, and then we'll connect that up to the webhook action. Now from here, we already have a pre-configured regex available to us. So there's no need to worry about having to learn regex, relearn regex in some cases, and go ahead and add that in there and test it out. This is going to head work for us immediately. The biggest thing we need to worry about is going ahead and defining this JSON path. And this is really the path that we want to extract that information to analyze. So here, if I go ahead and do double curly brace, period, now I'll be able to pull up a resource, credential, or a story. And this particular one, we're just going to go ahead and call that webhook action, the body, and then the field that we want to utilize to have this regex parse, and then put the value into this new field called domain. This message down here, as you can see, this is an optional message, so we can keep this, we can remove it. And for the purposes of today's webinar, we'll just go ahead and remove that. And now I can quickly test to make sure that this regex will actually parse the URL. And I can do that by clicking dry run. Dry run's a good way to not have to worry about going in and resubmitting the information again and continuously adding either new tickets or potential, just noise in the background from an alerting perspective. We can again select the action, dry run, and then the event that we want to test. So I'll choose the second one because that's the one that has my URL. When I click dry run, we'll see we have that field available, the new domain. And then from there, we can see that the Regex did parse that correctly. It stripped out the HTTPS, semicolon, the slashes, as well as the www, and just left us with tines.com. So again, we'll use this information further on downstream as we go through and we build out this story. But again, dry run is just a good way to ensure that what we're adding for actions and the configuration within the builder itself are going to work for us. So we don't get further down and have this really long and extensive story where all of a sudden things at the very beginning of that story aren't working for some reason. So it just helps with efficiency and getting things properly configured as we go through that. So now that I've extracted my domain, let's go ahead and look at submitting this directly to VirusTotal to be analyzed. Again, with these pre-configured templates, we have a number of options already available for us. So in this one here, we're going to go ahead and we're going to search for a URL in VirusTotal. Go ahead and connect this up. As you can see, there's no code that has to be written. There's no functions that need to be called. It's just a matter of dragging and dropping over the appropriate action, tying it up to the action above that. And then at that point, defining the information that's required within the builder here that might not already be available. So in this one, we're going to go ahead and ensure that my VirusTotal API key is correct. I've already stored that in my credentials. And now we'll go ahead and we'll take a look at that resource. And again, we're going to define the path and we'll use the extract domain action this time. We'll look at the specific domain that we want. So we'll go ahead and add that in here. And now I can go ahead and take a look at this event. And I'll also go and re-emit this. So this is essentially me going and filling out this form again, just not going through that whole process. It's just going to take all that information from the original event and then send that on down through those actions. So another way to validate and test without having to go ahead and back and forth and manually put information back in. Great. So it looks like we were able to extract that domain successfully, just like when we dry run. We did see the value properly parsed with that regex. And now here we have the VirusTotal event that's been submitted. And we're taking a look at that URL and that domain. So if we go in here into our events, we can take a look at and see we have a 200 status code, which is great. And now we have all that available information from VirusTotal immediately available to us for any downstream actions that we want to use this information for. Again, if we wanted to take a look at some Google Safe Browsing data, we can see nothing was detected. It's a clean website, but we also have all of the additional JSON information from the original submission of the webhook, as well as the extraction of the domain itself here. This is going to be extremely important as we start to add many actions to our story, where we can look to either build results or use the previous information from upstream actions to kick off searches in our SIM, our logging environment, or just really kind of utilize the information without having to go back and pull it from different resources, just have it all right there for us. So now that I've gone ahead and added my VirusTotal action, let's go and actually add in some URL scan templates or actions as well. So for this one, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at submitting the URL to URL scan. Again, you can see we have a number of these already built out. So we'll go ahead and drag and drop that over here. And then again, we'll check, make sure all this information is correct. Most importantly, we'll make sure we have our credentials properly configured. And then for this URL, we're going to go ahead and call that specific path from the extract domain. Add that in there. And then for public, I'm going to go ahead and turn this off. And now we can, again, either dry run this, ensure that it's going to work properly, Again, we have that 200. Now we have all of that information available on the UUID for that submission to URL scan, the visibility, and then some additional context and information around the results and the API. So within a few minutes, we've already gone ahead and we've configured a way for users or employees to submit URLs that may be suspicious to our security team or our frontline team that analyzes this. We're going ahead and we're extracting out all of the URLs that have been submitted and putting them individually into a new field. So that way those values can be analyzed in this particular case by virus total, and now also URL scan IO as well. And we'll continue to add to these stories here. And we can, again, take a look at dragging and dropping over an annotation. We'll add in now we have some information here on exactly why these two HTTP request actions are in and what they're doing here again, which is reviewing the URL that was submitted. Now, with the URL scan information and the submission to URL scan, I want to take a look at some of the other data that's available to me. So if I go back into my URL scan, request action templates, I can go ahead and actually retrieve the results from that submission. So here I'll go ahead and drag and drop that down to this action. And then we can see here in this URL section that we need to provide a UUID. And this is where Times really shows its power and its flexibility as well as the usability, because we don't have to worry about hard coding in what those values are or trying to notify a user or an analyst through Slack or email or Microsoft Teams or paging them to then go and manually look that information up. We can call that dynamically just by adding in this JSON path here and going to the submit to URL scan.io. And then we'll take a look at the body. And then I believe it's just going to be UUID. So we'll add that in. And then for purposes of continuing on, I'm going to go ahead and resubmit this form again. The reason I'm doing this is when I was testing some of this out earlier, URL scan gets a little, there we go, a little finicky on the dry run because it's looking for some certain values, and sometimes those values, when they're submitted to URL scan, it's not picking it up. So in this particular one, what I've done is just gone ahead and tested that out. And I probably didn't configure this JSON path because I was doing it blind. So we'll go ahead and we'll call body. And then from there, we'll do UUID. Again, we'll submit that there. We'll also take a look at the logs and see what's going on. So we got a 404 status code. If we go to the events, click on show, we can see what's going on. Could not find this page, message not found. So that might be typical for URL scans. So luckily, Times has some automation and some logic built in here under this configuration section, where we can go ahead and we can try to retry on certain statuses. So if we wanted to retry on that 404, just because URL scan couldn't find it the first time, doesn't mean it might not be able to find it the second or the third time. So let's go ahead and add in a new line here. Retry on status. And then we'll add that array. We'll do 404. So now if I go back and re-emit this webhook, clear up those logs. Now we'll be able to retry on that status and see if some new information comes back for us. Go ahead here, add that information back in. Submit that down. Now we should see this clear. There we go. So just by going back into the form and actually submitting that information, we can see that we have this new event available to us. We have that 200 status code, and now we have a ton of information that's coming back from URL scan, some data information on the requests, a lot of good information in here around the request, the method, the initiator, and a bunch of other information. We also have some stats and some meta information. We have some tasks. We have some submitter information. And if we go into this list here, we can take a look at some of the other URLs assigned and associated with that one that we just submitted. It's a lot of great information and useful information in here that we can take advantage of. If I go ahead and click cancel here, you can see we still have that blue bubble, but that's just from what our testing earlier. Now, if we go back into properties, we can actually go ahead and use additional URL scan templates to go ahead and get some of that information that was provided in the events that we were reviewing. So if I go ahead and take a look at the retrieve result again, I can bring this information over and I can drag and drop it, or because it's highlighted, I can simply do Command C, Command V, and then from there, make use of the same one. But I'm going to go ahead and change the name of this to download screenshot. And then instead of utilizing this URL here, I'll go ahead and take a look at submit to URL scan body. We can go ahead and take a look at that URL. No other information there. So now we can have that. And then again, we can dry run, test this, see what information comes back to us. Perfect. So again, just to run through and bring everybody up to speed. So again, we've created and dragged and dropped that webhook action over to start to receive information from the form. We're utilizing our extract domain event transform action to parse out the URLs that have been submitted. We're doing a search in virus total on that URL. We're submitting the URL to URL scan, retrieving the results from URL scan using the UUID that was provided to us in this original submission. And now we're going to go ahead and download the screenshot itself. And again, we're going to go ahead and retry on 404 status, just like we're getting here when we submit that. So now if I go ahead and clear out all of my events that I have, let's submit this for the very first time. Clear out our logs. Go back to our form. Add in our email address, our company, and that URL. So now once I hit submit, over here we'll have all of this information starting to populate for us. Now you notice we don't immediately have a bubble here, and I'm imagining that's because there was some 404 that occurred. So because we have that retry on status 404, it's going to continuously retry to get that information and retrieve the results from URL scan itself. Let's take a look at that event. Doesn't look like there's anything yet, but we do have a successful submission. So we should start to see once we continue to retry on that, and then we'll go ahead and download the screenshot itself from URL scan. Great, now we can see because we have that retry mechanism in place on this request. Again, you can see it just auto-corrected itself, took it from an action status of not working to working. And now we have a new action bubble here in this URL scan request action. And if we take a look at the events itself, we can click show, and now we'll have that body and then the URL and the image as well. Great. So now that we've submitted that and we're doing all this work to get information on the URLs that have been submitted, Now let's actually go ahead and create a ticket for our users and analysts so that way they can review that. But we'll also go ahead and notify the user that submitted this originally if this was a malicious URL that they submitted, or provide them with just the screenshot to show that this is what the main website looks like when you first go to that, and confirm that it's not malicious. So we'll drag and drop over that email action. We'll tie it up to the download screenshot. And then from here in this builder section, we'll update our recipients. Again, not having to hard code that in, but making it dynamic and calling that original webhook action that we have, adding the body, the email, and then we can go ahead and update our subject. This personable, so we'll call that webhook action. And then we can also provide them with the screenshot. Do the URL. Perfect. So again, I can go ahead, I can dry run this, test it out. But for the purposes of today's webinar, we'll just keep that as is. And then, like I had mentioned, the more important piece is creating that issue in Jira for our analysts to review. So we can drag and drop that over here. Again, we'll tie that up to our download screenshot. And then as you can see, we're just calling in that URL for the Atlassian Jira API. So we're going to utilize Jira domain. We'll update our key down here. Keep issue type as task. And then we'll change the name from Thomas to Kevin. And then we'll just ensure that we have the right resource as well as the right credential. And then we can also update this summary. And we'll call that webhook action. Have that URL there. And then we can provide a description with a lot of that rich information that we had from virus total as well as URL scan. So if we want to do something very simple, where we say this is the VT scan link, and then we can go ahead and do virus total dot body. We're going to look for the permalink, and then we'll do a little bit of formatting. Call our submit to URL scan body result. And then in this ticket, I also want to provide the URL scan screenshot. Add that information in here as well. Go to URL scan. And we want that retrieve result body. And then we want the task. And we want the shot. Perfect. So now when we go through and we rerun this story here, we'll have that link to virus total. We'll have the link to virus URL scan. And then we'll also have a link to that screenshot from URL scan as well. And then we'll have a nice little subject here, understanding exactly what URL was analyzed. Again, providing a lot of good context to the analyst that's going to be reviewing that ticket once it's submitted. And then we're also going to email a notification to the person that submitted that form, providing them an update that the URL has been analyzed, thanking them for their submission personally, and then also providing them with a screenshot, letting them see exactly what it is that URL looks like when they go to browse to that. So again, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete these events out. We'll start fresh. We'll go back to our form. Our name, email, company, and that link. Click submit. Great. So we have our webhook action, receive that original event. Our event transform action is going through and it's parsing out the URLs that have been submitted and putting them into its new field domain. We've submitted it directly to VirusTotal. We've submitted it to URL scan. And now we're just waiting on those results to build and then download the screenshot. And now we have our email being sent out, as well as that JIRA ticket being created in the proper project. So if I go into my events and show all of the events, again, we're going to provide all of the information for each action so we can utilize that in any combination of additional actions we want to add to this story. But if we go into the create JIRA issue and click on body, I'll grab our JIRA key here. Go to one of our tickets, add that key in. And now here you can see we have, again, that subject, the URL being analyzed, the actual URL itself. We have the VirusTotal link here, so we can immediately go to that site and take a look at the information provided to us. We can go back into the JIRA ticket, and now we also have the URL scan link and also the screenshot of the URL scan results itself. So we click on that. This is exactly what that homepage is going to look like when we go to tines.com. So some really, really nice and good information. And as you probably saw in a previous ticket, we can go ahead and we can format these however we would like. So if we wanted to take a look at that ticket previously, which was 3736, and if we want, to do a data table like this and provide the information in a easy to digest and read format, we can actually do a little reverse engineering, grab that key, back over to our story, and then we'll do get issue, drag and drop that over here. I'll go into our properties. Again, we want to make sure our resource information is correct. I know I need to update my credentials. And now I can go ahead and add that key in directly. I could also tie this up to this JIRA action down here, and I could just call that key specifically from that original create issue in JIRA. But if I go ahead and select this, click run, go into the events, and this is where we can see exactly what's needed to properly create that data table in JIRA itself. So go ahead and look at the description field in here. Now we can see if we want to have a data table, it's simply just doing double pipe, star is going to bold the field name, double pipe, star, details, double pipe, and then after that, it's just going to be single pipe with the name and then the information that we want to provide to that. Just a quick way to go ahead and capture that to format it however we would like. And we can delete that now. But as you can see, now we have the ability within a few minutes to have a way for our employees and users to submit URLs to the security team or the IT team or the frontline team that's going to be analyzing this. We have some annotations in here. So we did build this story, so we can go ahead and mark that as done. And then also our check story validation. And then again, we've gone ahead and added some additional annotations down here where we're going to review the URLs and point out that that's what those actions are doing. And then we also did submit that email to the user that originally added the information to the form itself. And this is what that email will look like once that submission goes through. Yeah, let's bring that up here. And now we can see your URL has been analyzed or analyzed, and then thanks for the submission, adding that name in dynamically, and then providing them with that screenshot as well for what that website will look like. So that's what we wanted to walk through in today's Tines 101 webinar session. So really simple way to, again, start to automate this type of particular workflow, as well as provide an enriched ticket and a notification to the person that was submitting it. Certainly we can get a lot more complex and we can provide a lot more automation and flexibility. One popular one is this phishing story that we have here, where we're going to be monitoring and checking an inbox. And then we're going to be doing something very similar where we extract those URLs. We also take a look at attachments simultaneously. And then from there, kick off a search in a SIM tool, and then add some additional prompts and triggers based on some additional logic that we want to provide. And then down here, taking action on if that information from the email was submitted is malicious, to lock out the account, notify the victim, update our JIRA ticket, and then also do some isolation through Carbon Black and some additional updates within JIRA itself. So if you're looking to get started with Tines, certainly go to tines.com, and from there you can request a demo specific to any use cases that you've been thinking of, or you can simply sign up for free for the community edition and start to build out the story that we walked through today, or utilize the sample story that comes with the product itself. Thank you everyone for the time today. Really hope you found it to be useful, and look forward to seeing you on the next Tines 101 session.